Okay, fantastic. I think we should get started 4 minutes in. Let's get the show on the road. Just give me 1 second to maximize this. Hi everyone, my name is Tushar Tejuja, founder and CEO at HackerTrail. Thanks so much for taking the time to actually join us this evening. I have three wonderful panelists with me, and we're going to make introductions in just a minute. Um, but let's get started with this. So this entire story is about acing your interview from phone screen to offer negotiation. We know that it can be a fairly complicated process, particularly if you've not interviewed in a while, or even if you've interviewed, you maybe have not gone through all of the steps and are wondering what went wrong. So we thought we'd take the time and actually set something up with very experienced recruiters who may be doing a lot of other things, but what their core focus is on hiring best people into their company. And so let me start with introducing myself, and then we will talk about some of the folks there. So myself, like I said, my name is Tushar. I've been around in Singapore since 2010. I've been an entrepreneur since 2014. I've actually gone through the process of going the corporate route, having about 12 years of experience, various experience on Wall Street. That's where I built my career. When the global financial crisis came along, which is literally the last depression before this one, I was part of Lehman Brothers, and I lost my job while I was representing them at a certain event. So I know that it is quite painful what we're going through right now, and hopefully with some help, everyone will get over to the other line. So with that, I'd love to introduce the rest of the panelists as well. So here is our agenda. Here's what we're covering. First the panelists, and then the typical interview process. A panel discussion. This is where we'll actually get into each stage and what we cover and the tips and tricks that people think about and talk about at each stage. Then we'll finally get into offer negotiation and then some Q&A. So first up is Iriani Kamal. Iriani, we work with her very closely at the Zulke Group. Iriani, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, please.
Yeah, sure. A quick introduction. So for myself, I'm a senior recruiter at Zulke Group. Zulke is a unique name in itself because we are headquartered in Switzerland. So that's where we originally formed over the past 50 years. But we came to Singapore about 3 years ago. And just before I joined Zulke, I was also previously in another tech company. And I was hiring around the region, also predominantly in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Thailand. And before that, I've always been in agencies over the past 7 years, being in boutique agencies and also very large agencies. So I would say, hopefully, I'll be able to provide, perspective from both sides of the coin to everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Awesome. Thanks, Iriani. Jason, over to you, please.
Hey, hi everyone. Hope everyone's safe during this lockdown period and wherever you are. So I'm a recruitment specialist for technical recruitment and for Funding Societies. So Funding Societies is a fintech company. Our founders actually met in Harvard MBA program in the US 5 years ago. One Singaporean, one's Indonesian, and they wanted to bring back the solution of providing financing to small businesses in local communities. So we have done that. Now we're about 400 people across 3 different countries in Southeast Asia. And I'm sort of helping them with, supporting them on technical recruitment. Now the focus is really being able to connect distributed teams. I think with the lockdown, I think that sort of issue has become even more important. Before this, I was with Egon Zehnder, which was an executive search firm. So I was helping them doing market mapping as well as candidate pipelines for senior levels. So I guess coming from a larger organization to working at a startup, sort of, getting a couple perspectives of what people look for, and hopefully I can, give something insightful today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Rekha, last but not the least, over to you, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time, on this Wednesday to jump on the call. A little bit about myself and about Compare Asia Group. So Compare Asia Group is about 5.5 years old. We started as a comparison business, and now we've actually matured into a fully integrated financial management platform. We're about 300 people across 6 countries and growing every day. Myself, so as the talent strategy lead for Compare Asia Group, I look at the strategy piece on how we can attract talent in more creative ways. But I also spearhead the recruitment team across the region and across all functions. However, prior to this, I was an associate consultant with Tech Systems, where my focus was on technical hires as well, mainly within the applications development space. So yeah, hopefully, we'll be able to provide the perspectives of what we look for in our candidates when we look out for them, especially, with the market as it is being so dynamic between, financial services and more traditionally structured companies, and with the influx of companies like ours, and also like funding societies where, where culturally we are very different.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Rekha. Fantastic. So that's 3 top panelists for you. Now let's get into the meat of it. So I'd like to start with introducing a typical interview process, right? I call this typical because it could have shades and grades depending on the company that you're at. But from the get-go, you'll find most companies have a concept of a phone screen. And you've probably been through one unless you're a fresh graduate and this is your first time around. But the phone screen can vary very, very greatly, right? So it can be a 5-minute phone screen by someone who may not know nothing about tech recruitment, or it could be someone who is educated and spent their career doing that, right? And so that diversity there is something you're going to have to pick up on depending on each company that you interview with. Now, the technical round, this gets really interesting. When you look at MNCs, typically what we see is that the technical round is good, but it's not terribly elaborate because they know that there are several people who are going to go through this. But when you look at a startup, from the technical round onwards, honestly, it gets really very intense, right? You've got either a senior engineer or someone who's a staff software engineer or someone who's basically one notch at the same level or one notch higher who's interviewing you. And they want to know everything about you, right? Everything that you've done to build your career in a certain manner and what you've not done. From there, you can dovetail into a technical test, and quite sometimes companies may combine step 2 and 3. They may either have a technical problem that you solve during the interview process, or they parallel track both of these activities. And as you go through that, obviously they get to know who you are, not just when it comes to talking about something, but walking the talk, right? The 4th step is really culture fit, and that's where people want to analyze. And it's not like they're not gauging for culture through the process. People are absolutely watching what your attitude's like, what your responses are like, how do you think about teams, how do you think about yourself in context of a team and a company. But culture fit is really to zero in on what motivates you, what drives you. Do those drivers and motivation points align with what the company has to offer? And if you get all of those sorted, you most certainly will move to an offer. Obviously, at this point, this offer comes in after all of those steps are done because it's a loaded statement. When a company offers you something, it's real. It's not trivial. It's not something that someone can just say on the phone unless it's a 2-person startup, right? Most companies will actually have a formal process, get sign-offs, and then so at that point, they know they are very, very certain they want to bring you on board. Next step is, one interesting fact is, this is actually something that I've experienced myself. I remember when I was interviewing at Goldman Sachs, it took me 7 interviews to crack that thing, right? And this was 2003, tells my age. And it took me about 2 months to do that, right? So some interviews processes can get really intense. And we see that most MNCs will actually be much shorter, 2 to 3 weeks. But you'll see product-based companies and fast-growing startups, they're the ones with the more elaborate process because they've got so many more checks and balances to do. One of my mentors told me very clearly that when you work for a service-based company, they're not in the business of building bulletproof software. They're building software that works functionally. But when you're working for product-based startups or companies that support product-based startups, the quality of the software that you build is so far supreme that they have to literally make sure that you can cross the T's and dot the I's before they bring you on board. So there's some interesting stuff for you in there. Now, before we actually get into the panel, which I'm sure a lot of you are looking forward to, what I want to talk about is how an IT recruiter actually reviews your resume. So this part is very important for you to understand because there are X number of people who will look at your resume. And if your resume doesn't come across in a certain manner, it's not conveying who you are and what you bring to the table. You may be fantastic. This is 2020, and you may be thinking about why is the resume still important? Why am I still talking about submitting the resume? And the reality of it is that before you actually get into displaying who you are and talking about who you are, it has to go through the first level of filter. And for lack of a better way of approaching this, the resume is it, right? That's exactly the document that everyone's got to look for. So a few key points to mention here. One is, does your resume look presentable? This is super critical, right? If you've got a resume that you made 10 years ago when you started working, please throw that out the window. Right? You need a brand new resume. You need a modern look and feel. You need something that actually represents who you are as a person. Make sure there are no formatting or grammar issues, because that could instantly reject you, get you rejected for no fault of yours, just because you put in some bad grammar in there. Right? Because people view it with a certain lens that if you can't actually display who you are and bring that forth, how are you going to churn out the right software or the right data for the company that you're getting into? The next part is you make sure that all the right keywords are on your resume. And what I mean by the right keywords is do not dump. So people quite often believe that, hey, listen, let me just put every technology under the sun on the resume. It's an easy thing to do, right? It takes a second. But you're actually creating a disadvantage for yourself, because if you don't have clarity on who you are, you can't present that over, that's not really going to come through, right? So make sure that you don't do that. And anything that you put on the resume, you must be able to talk with confidence. The third part is what types of projects and companies are on there. This is actually what it boils down to. So there's lots of companies that people may not have heard of, which is fine, which is where the project that you work on is very important. Or you could be working for a top-notch company, but you worked on a really sidetracked project. Does not matter. It's a career. It happens. It happens to all of us, right? So there are no right or wrongs in this. But what you have to do is everything that you have done, you have to bring it to the table in a very clear manner without overstating it. Lots of times you focus on the V's and not the I's. While the V is good from a team spirit standpoint, the I's is what it's about, because you're being interviewed. So recruiters often want to know what you brought to the table, what your contributions were. Again, in the grand context of your team and your company. And then what they're thinking about as they're scanning through your resume is it worth my time to actually spend potentially 30 minutes with you on the phone? Right? And that's what it really boiled down to. This is the first pass. They've not spoken to you. All you've done is sent them a resume, right? Or whether it's gone through an agency or whether you've applied directly does not matter. But it's the quality of that resume that's going to get you that phone screen or not. Of course, if you come very well recommended through a colleague who's already working there, then the story could be slightly different, but not vastly different. You must understand that. So quick tip for you is that some of the people watching your resume may not be from a tech background at all. And that's something that you have to understand, that they may be doing really dumb keyword searches to get you over the line. So this is not ideal. This doesn't happen typically in startups. It happens more so in MNCs where there are gazillion number of roles and you could get lost in the maze. But be aware of that, because that could cost you your chance to secure an interview. So again, resume counts a lot. With that, now what you're going to do is we're going to get into the panel, and that's where I'm going to invite opinions from the entire panel to talk about various steps of the interview process. So we'll start with the first one, which is the phone screen. Now, as I mentioned, the phone screen is something that can be quite varied. Some companies could do it in 5 minutes, could be an admin person doing it, or some companies could take 30 to 45 minutes. And what that depends on is the quality of the products or the quality of the team that they're hiring, how important that role is, and who's actually on the phone with you. So with that, I'd love to ask Iriani to start with and tell us about what the interview process is like at Julke, and how do you guys go about it?
Sure. For the phone screens, I would split it to non-technical and technical positions. So for example, for all of our engineering positions, the phone screen will be hosted by an engineer. And of course, depending on the candidate level of experience, junior, intermediate, expert, advanced, then the engineer will be assigned accordingly. We're very fortunate because our interview team is not only available in Asia, but we can also utilize the interview teams across Europe as well. So we can do after work hours time zone. But what it also means is that you have to be ready for whoever that's on the other side, meaning if you have to expect for whatever nationality the phone screen is coming from. So that's for technical interviews. For non-technical roles such as HR role, BDM, BSM, finance positions, then recruitment would do the first cut. So I would do the initial phone screen to really find out the motivation, but of course to introduce the company, but most importantly to really manage the expectation, because sometimes the job title and the job description may not match to their idea of what the candidate may have in mind when they first apply. And it's really important to really clarify this at the start.
Awesome. Thanks, Adani. Rekha, would you like to share some?
Yeah, sure. I think how ours differs from Zulka's is that we do all of the initial phone screens, regardless whether it's a technical or non-technical hire. And we use this opportunity to understand a little bit more about the candidate's experiences. We look at their communication skills. It's going to be a big one for us as well. Your energy over the phone. Are you able to hold a conversation? And when we ask you questions, do you need multiple prompting to get into the details? Are you able to properly articulate your experience and present yourself in addition to what's on your CV? The second part of that also, we do cover a culture fit aspect. We look at what your motivations are, and also what your goals are as well. Obviously, when we hire somebody, we don't want them to be with us for 6 months or a year. We want, to look at career progression as well, and whether or not your long-term goals are aligned to what we as a company or the role can actually offer. Is it, and for example, like if, 2 to 3 years down the road, you want to be more of a people manager and less hands-on, that's fine. That's not right or wrong. It's just maybe not aligned to what we could possibly offer, where everybody here is hands-on. So this 45 minutes is where we really set the ground rules for both ourselves and also the candidate. And as what Irani mentioned, it's a lot about managing expectations. And part of it is also managing expectations in terms of timeline, taking them through the interview process and how long it could approximately take, right? I mean, you as a candidate, we are very aware that you're probably actively interviewing in the market, and it's always good for us to know and for you to know as well how long these processes could take, because it's just helpful to know. And it's at the end of the day, the more data points that you have, the better it is.
Awesome. Thank you. Jason, over to you, please.
No, I think really echoing a couple of the points that they shared really is a lot about managing expectations. It is, first of all, to get you to know you as a person, really just to see what your energy is. I think I would get a sense of how genuinely interested they would be. These candidates would be in their work, in sense of not just telling me what you do, but in terms of what you get out of it, and so what the impact that gave the company in terms of the projects that you've done. I think, there's, someone that's a lot more interested would be able to go on and elaborate a lot more about the accomplishments they've had, rather than just saying, oh, I was just involved in this project. I think as well, just like Rekha said about motivations, I think another way to really understand on how, I guess specifically, we want to make sure that's aligned with what our company wants. And I think it's also good for the candidate before they before the phone screen, with that if they were to prepare, maybe at least just take a look at what the company does and seeing how this role really aligns with what they want to achieve in their career as well. So it's really just mapping out that sort of the expectations as well as motivations as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think we've got a couple of questions coming in before we actually get on to the next section. Let me just check this out really quickly. I guess one question is, how long should my introduction be? And when asked to tell about yourself, what should I limit myself at? So who wants to take that?
I'll take that. This is my most favorite question, or most favorite advice that I always tell at the end of the interview. I always say to prepare 30 seconds or 1 minute elevator pitch. And when you introduce yourself, it is not an opportunity to introduce your entire resume. It is an opportunity to really introduce yourself. So you should, as a guideline, you should have 3 parts of it, which is one, a third of it should be a summarized version of what your resume is, like, what you did throughout your career, but just in the shortest version possible. The middle part is what you hope, to achieve next, and why you applied for the position. So you should stop yourself in your own introduction and not wait till the recruiter have to cut you off, which would be unfortunate.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, great. Okay, we've got one more. Yeah, okay. This is the little bit thinking ahead. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. So that concludes the first section. Obviously, you can keep your questions running after that. And here you go, 2 more questions are coming. Who do you take yourself to the next round of interview process? Hold on, sorry, pardon me 1 second. Who do you take yourself to the next round of the interview process when the first round is with a non-tech person? Did you get that question? Yeah. No, no worries. We'll just skip to the next one. What does the recruiter want to hear in my introduction if I have a long work experience?
I can sort of touch on that first. I guess, you know, by then, I guess reading about the role that you've applied for and seeing maybe certain aspects of it, like if you have a long work experience, maybe it's a managerial role. You can talk about sort of, you know, the teams that you've built, the teams that you have managed in the past. And like Irani said, you know, keep it brief. I think as a recruiter, once we hear your introduction, if we want to dive deeper in any aspect of your career history, we will ask those questions. So you don't have to worry about covering all the bases. I think just as long as you get the main points in that are relevant to the role that you're applying for, I think that those are the main the things that we look for.
Awesome, great, thanks. Should my introduction pitch vary depending on the interview that I'm in and how? I think definitely, let me,
Oh,
sorry.
do you want to take
No,
this?
go for it, Rekha.
I think to a certain extent it should. You should always know who your audience is. You know, if you're talking to somebody who's technical, obviously their interest is going to be in terms of your technical experience. If you're talking to somebody, you know, maybe from the TA team, or if you're talking to somebody from HR, then we're going to want to know a little bit more about your motivations. What is it about the role that interests you, and what you're looking to get out of the conversation. So I would say certain aspects, yes, you'll want to keep, but always be aware of who your interviewer is. Because then your conversation, you know, and what you want to share about yourself should be tailored to that person.
Great, okay. So we've got 2 more, then we'll move on to the next section. Guys, let's hold some of the questions for the next round as well. What questions can a candidate ask to the recruiter at this stage? I think one of the questions that I get asked popularly is, can I ask what the compensation structure for the role is? Is it too soon to ask? So any thoughts on that, guys? What would be a question that would offend you if someone asked, or what you would think is perfectly okay if they did? Yeah.
I feel all things are really fair game. You know, maybe not questions about me, about the company. Although I like some of my favorite questions are usually tied to what was my experience joining the company, and you know, why did I join the company, and so what my journey was. I think, you know, I think those are very thoughtful questions to have. In terms of compensation, I think as long as we're I guess the conversations I have usually at this stage, in terms of managing expectations, we would also ask, you know, in terms of your current salaries, what your expectations would be moving to a next role. We'd be able to share like the range that we have budgeted for this. Well, of course, we would always preface it saying, you know, it would also depend on, you know, your performance during the interviews as well. So we try to keep that quite transparent as well.
I'd just like to add a tip. Absolutely agree with what Jason was saying. I do enjoy questions when it's something specific that I can answer, because it shows that they want to hear another perspective. But my one tip I just want to share when it comes to questions, you don't want to also showcase that you were not listening through the interview if you ask the question that was already answered by the recruiter. So if the recruiter has already done the introduction, recruiter has given you, you know, answers in drips along the entire interview, and at the end of it, you ask something which definitely have been covered. Of course, the recruiter should be patient and will answer you anyway, because, you know, we're charming that way. However, it also implies that you may not have listened well, and that's what you don't try not to do.
And actually, that brings up a rather valid point, right? Most people, when they have to take a phone screen, they're probably ducking out of work. Not right now. Right now, everyone's at home, but typically, otherwise, you're ducking out of work, which means you're going to try and find a quiet place. And in Singapore, good luck with that, right? I mean, there's even if you go to a cafe, it's noisy. You go to any side corner, you almost look weird because there's a bunch of smokers there. And so it is odd. So if you know that there's a phone call that's going to come, and if it does come in, it was unplanned, if you're not able to take that, it's polite to actually say that I can can I call you back in 30 minutes or 5 minutes or in the evening, right? Because you're in the middle of something. So don't feel obliged to start taking it right there if you don't feel the best. You must be prepped, and this is the one chance that you have to wow a recruiter, right? And so you should take that chance and take it very seriously. Okay, the question that the lady was asking before was, how do you take yourself to the next round when the person interviewing you in the first round is a non-tech person and you're a techie? And so how do you know that they're understanding what your language is? And that's a pretty interesting question, actually. If a non-techie interviews a techie for the first, phone screen round, then how do you get around that? I guess you guys are not. You guys are tech recruiters, so you automatically get it. But that would be an interesting one. I'd say at the very least, you'd want to understand what they're after in the interview process. And even if it's a non-techie, they're there for an objective. They want to know some things about you. They will either ask you very mundane questions on, are you actively looking? Where are you with other interviews? What's your salary structure like? When are you available? Or they could actually get into the meat of it. And if they do, then I think they're well aware. So you would have to size that up depending on how clueless or clued in they appear as part of the phone screen. That's what I would say.
If I could jump in on this one.
Please.
So when you're speaking to somebody non-technical, it's also about what understanding that person has walking away from that conversation. Now, tell somebody, yeah, while I'm a tech recruiter, at one point I was not technical, right? To me, Java was coffee or an island, an Indonesian island. Like that's all I knew about Java. But it's literally me sitting at that table. Do I walk away from that conversation understanding what you do, what you build, and the tools that you use? Now, if I'm able to do that, and then I'm also able to successfully articulate it back to you and later to the hiring manager about your profile, then that's how we actually gauge it. Now, if I walk away from that conversation more confused and I still have no idea what you do, then you're not really able to communicate what your skill sets are to someone who's non-technical, which comes back to communication skills, right? In this day and age, you're not just going to be working with other technical people, you're going to be working with non-technical colleagues, and you have to be able to share and articulate your experience and what you do on a daily basis in a successful manner.
Awesome. That's definitely a great tip for sure. Okay, let's move on to the next round, which is the technical round, right? So this is where you're meeting with someone, as I had stated before, you're meeting with someone who's either going to be your peer in the future or maybe one or two notches above you in the company if it doesn't have a flat hierarchy. But regardless, you will be meeting with someone who is well qualified to take the interview. And that's important to know, which means they've been there, done that, they've gone through it, and the company finds them valuable enough that they can be on that seat interviewing you and judging whether you can become a part of that company. So there are some, in some cases, this is when I was a hiring manager, what I had seen is when I was a much more junior hiring manager, when I was interviewing someone, particularly someone who was a little bit senior, they thought that, some chump was put on the phone when it should have been someone else, and maybe I took the place for someone else. And I think what you should definitely understand is that everyone is there for a reason. Mistaken identities happen, but 99.9% of interviewing you. Now, of course, there's a lot of things happening. You're gauging what they're like in attitude. You're trying to be as clear and precise as possible as part of the technical round. You're trying to make sure, or you must make sure, that you don't appear egoistic yet confident, right? So that means it requires practice. And particularly now, when you're actually going to be doing this more and more online for the next foreseeable future, you need to practice a lot more on what it feels like to be on the camera with someone else on the other end. So, questions could come from literally the first part of your career to your most current project, or how you think about innovation and growth. Whatever it is from a 360 standpoint, this is the round that will actually get you to the next level, right? So you have to be super prepared for it. And with that, I'd love to ask Jason, what do you think about the technical round and what goes on into that?
Oh man, so the technical round, so I've worked with Tushar quite a lot of these, with our candidates, but essentially this is really where the metal hits the grindstone on this, because I think after the round with me or the HR team getting understanding expectations, this is really where we see your coding ability, and so for us in Funding Societies, we have a couple rounds. It's a back-to-back rounds with our developers. So some of them are senior, some of them are mid-level. They'd be doing a live coding exercise with you. So as intimidating as this is, I think our interviewers have been coached and also are very collaborative. It's like a code pairing exercise at work with your colleagues. So they're very, they give you hints, they walk you through it. And, while they see your capabilities in, programming and solving things, they also want to see sort of your attitude around it. So if we've had some people that have a better grasp of the language, but then they're sort of married to one particular problem and they can't think of another alternative method. Whereas someone else who may not be as strong, but they see the problem and they sort of adapt to it, saying, okay, I'll respond to this guy's hint, and then I'll see how I can then change my answer. So they look for that sort of problem solving and attitude, during these technical rounds as well. So it's a mixture of, your coding experiences, but there are some other soft skills that they observe as well.
And Jason, if you were to take it outside of software development, what do you think, right? So if you look at other tech roles, maybe it's infrastructure, maybe it's product, project.
Yeah, so similarly, with our, so our product teams, they would go through like a case study. So I think that's more of a highly discussive type of role. Even with product design, they would sort of flesh out a scenario and saying, how would you go around the wireframing, the design of the work. So they do want to see that collaborative effort. Ultimately, these are the people they'll be working very closely with. So again, with constant, requirements changing, I think across all different technical abilities, they want to see how you can problem solve and how you can adapt to different changes and requirements. So it won't be a stress test per se, but I think, as different assignments, even with our data analyst, data science positions, they would also have those discussions where like, what do you do if these requirements change? So, so I think, all of our technical interview rounds are quite, immersive. And I think, just being able to respond to how the interviewer interacts with you, I think is a good way to sort of look at it.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'd like to add as well that technical rounds would also be relevant for all positions, especially if, let's say, you're an experienced professional. So assuming 7 years and above and you're already experienced, your next job would also have some component of a technical round. So if you're applying as a copywriter, definitely you have to do a copywriting assignment. If you're applying for a team lead position, maybe you'll get a case study to show how you would lead the team in this difficult situation. When we have our, when we're hiring for tax or for finance, then we can ask, how would you calculate this situation in this country if you're faced with this? So there will always be a situation where you have to go through some form of technical round. I mean, personally, when I went through this interview to be hired by Zulkifli, I also went through a technical round where I have to write down Boolean searches and sourcing codes and all that. So I'm prepared for that. I was also happy if they do not have that. But when I went through the round, I was prepared to really be as hands-on as if needed in that technical round, and as hands-off if needed, if they really want a helicopter view. So I would say, be prepared for all options, especially when you're trying to showcase your level of experience and the level of seniority that you're expecting.
Awesome, that's a great tip. Yeah. Rekha, anything to add from your end?
I think my one piece of advice for the technical round is, definitely it comes down to how collaborative you are in your communication skills. But the one thing I also tell my candidates is, this is not the time for you to try anything new. You may see like a new framework online that you wanted to try out and you think would work. Like, the worst thing you could do is write yourself into a corner that you can't get out of, because then you probably spend 30 to 45 minutes of your time writing all this code that now does not work, and you can't get that time back. The prep for the interview, for example, for ourselves with Compare Asia Group, across all levels, it always comes down to problem-solving skills and data structures. So the easiest way to do that, is your algorithm questions. If you're regularly practicing on like LeetCode or HackerRank, at the medium level questions, those are usually a good place to start. But it does come down to practice. This is not the time for you to try something new. I get that it's very tempting to want to impress the interviewer, but the last thing you want to do is walk out of that 60-minute or 2-hour interview and go, I actually knew the answer to that question, but I started out wrong. And if you find that halfway you made a mistake, admit to it, have the humility to say, actually, I realized I made a mistake and this is how it should be done, right? And then ask for permission. Can I actually go back and rework it? Is there enough time? And it does come down to that. Whether or not you're able to take direction and like Jason said, whether or not you're able to take on hints and be adaptive in how you actually present your solution as well. And I think the worst thing you could do is try to smoke your way through it. If you're, especially in an interview setting, if you say that you're an expert in a particular subject, that don't forget that the interviewer is there for a reason, and they are going to push those boundaries to see how far and how deep your knowledge goes. So, be aware of how you're presenting yourself. Like, don't try to smoke your way through it. This is not the time to try anything new. And like, you got through the first round, you're there for a reason. You've done the prep. Like, rely on that.
Yeah. Great,
Yeah.
absolutely. Thanks for that. There's one more thing that I would add is you spoke about smoking through it. I think the other side of it, what we see at Hackatrail is that when lots of people actually finish their interviews, we ask them, hey, so how did it go? And a lot of them will come back and say, listen, I think I did. It was 8 on 10, maybe 9 on 10. And then you go back to the hiring team and you ask them, how was the interview? They're like, the person fell apart in the first 10 minutes and it's not going to go through, right? So I think this is clearly where you should know this. And this is, from years of experience, you gather this, that a lot of the interviewers have a little bit of a poker face on them, and that's by design, right? They don't want to tell you whether you're doing well or not. They just want to gauge on how confident you are on what you say. And you can only be confident if you're not BSing. So again, don't smoke it, focus on the facts. If you don't know it, tell them you don't know it. If you know something about it, but not enough, tell them you know something about it, but not enough, right? Even at Hackatrail, for example, anyone on the front line who actually joins us, even though we use software for a large part of our process, but the reality of it is that everyone who's frontline, who's talking to a candidate or to the client, needs to have very good skills in tech recruitment. So we've got a 4-part process, out of which one of our rounds is, I think, 90 to 120-minute round, where people are sourcing using various channels and coming up with the top 3 profiles that they can find for certain types of complicated requirements that we get. So yeah, it is, as the panelist said, it is part of the norm. I think a couple of questions that just came in. Let me just answer that. Just 1 second. How do I politely disagree with the interviewer where I'm sure that my code is more optimized? Will that be a negative for me? Right. So this happens a lot actually, where the person on the other end, the hiring manager says, no, your code's wrong. And this person's 1,000,000% sure that, what I've done is correct. So any advice over there on how someone should tackle that? Because it's an awkward situation, right? When you feel that you have it right, but the other person insists that it's wrong.
I think it's always healthy to have that discourse saying, this is my method, this is my way of coding, and this is really why I think it's the best solution. So I think it's good to still put your foot down, in a polite way, saying, I feel that these are the reasons why I feel that it's more optimal than the other way. But having said that, we try and also, prevent this sort of, his or her code versus, the interviewer's code, by having multiple technical rounds. So we do have a couple of our engineers that speak to the candidates. So at least at this point, if they have this sort of perspective, then it'll be easier for the it's not tied to a specific coding problem. So it gives a more holistic view of the candidate's ability.
Got it. Cool. Awesome. There's another one, which is, how long does it take in the back end for technical managers to decide whether to hire someone or not? I think this is a more broad stroke question. We could choose to answer it now or a little bit later. But I'd say obviously each stage of the interview is important, and each stage decides whether you move on to the next round or not, right? So it's not going to be one interview that you do really well and that's slam dunk and you're in, right? It has to be a step-by-step process, because that's where you get a true flavor of the company, what the company's, what your peers and what your managers and so on and so forth bring to the table. So I think it will take some time. Interestingly, we've been in the situation where we've run some speed networking events before, and we've had the case where there were 4 people who were offered after a particular event. I don't think any of you guys were at that event, but 4 candidates were offered after a 5-minute interview. right? And so that really spooked them, and they were offered by a bank, and that really spooked them because they were like, wait a minute, I don't even know enough about the role that I'm getting into. But the hiring manager felt so confident that what they're hearing from them and based on their background and how they carry themselves in those 5-6 questions, that they were it. It wasn't a very senior role, 2 to 5 years of experience, but still. So I think, yeah, it depends. It can be that quick, but more often than not, it could take a lot of collaboration and deliberation behind the scenes for managers to figure that out. Anything else that anyone wants to add to this question? Okay, cool. Okay, the next one is, I think this is the last one. This is by someone by the name of Arunachalam Ramanathan. Thank you for that. Some folks have decided to leave their name on there, some has not. So I guess the question is whether we have to be, I'm sorry, that just got moved out. What happened? Pardon me. Oh yeah, there it is. Whether we have to be specific on answering a question. For a few questions, we may have to answer quite elaborate. Is that okay during an interview, or should we cut it short?
I think it depends on the type of question. So of course with certain questions, so not the introductions, I think further than that. If there are some specific questions, I think you would be getting into the specifics of it. And again, it depends on who your audience is. I like some of the more technical folks when they're speaking to me, they say, I'll wait till the technical round to ask certain questions or share certain details. But I think, on certain types of questions, definitely you would need to elaborate on some. So, you would have to trust your judgment and seeing, based on who's asking the question as well, what do you expect them to answer. So a TA asking about, what you did on a project versus what one of the more technical staff members, asking what you did on the project, and the answer may be a little bit more elaborate for the technical staff than for the TA.
Awesome, thanks for that. Okay, the next question that we have is, if someone is applying as a graduate after the university, how should the compensation question be answered if asked when it comes to expected salary? I think we'll hold on this. I think we'll cover this a little bit further down the road when it comes to offer negotiation. There's another one. How do you overcome anxiety at the table? So this is a key one, right? People sweat a lot. People get really, really nervous and uptight when it comes to actually answering, right? Especially in context of imposter syndrome, when one can have only constant thoughts and doubt on his or own capability as a software engineer. Oh, that's a loaded question.
Actually, so Tushar, I think you're on the answered tab actually. I did answer this one, and so for Chandler, yeah, no, and I think it's actually a very good, thing to bring up. I think candidate confidence is something we don't want to, undermine. And I think, we want to, really provide, an environment where they can really do their best work and perform during the interview. And what I share with Chandler, and also I think is important, if you have any doubt in sort of your abilities, and I guess with this question as a software engineer, or, as any other technical person, I would say get involved in your communities. There are various, online, offline communities out there that will, that have a social aspect of, as a software engineer, you get to meet other software engineers. When we in Singapore moved our office, we actually had a separate group called Singapore JS, so JavaScript community. They host all these different events at different companies. They have a few speakers talk about their code. We buy pizza. Everyone loves pizza for some reason. And, you get to socialize, you get to mingle with other people that are software engineers and coders at a, much more friendly environment. And that's where you can really ask them about sort of, the problems you're having, and sort of, just understanding from them what they're doing as well. And I think you can build a little bit more confidence in your own abilities as a software engineer or a data analyst or a product manager, with these sort of, I think interactions. So I think if anyone wants any sort of, references in Singapore for these sort of communities, I'd be happy to share them as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Jason. Okay, let's move on to the next round, which is the tech test. I think we'll speed it up a little bit. I didn't realize we're at 5:45 now. So let's speed it up a little bit. So when it comes to the tech test, obviously there are two types of tests that you may essentially get, or sometimes both. One is an automated challenge when you're given the link to a website and you're asked to go crack a challenge. In this case, the employer has already done their part of setting the right benchmark for the test, and they've obviously vetted it and so on and so forth. So the test actually yields a certain result, which is automated, and that comes straight into the hiring manager's inbox. This is typically used for mass scale style recruitment, right? Or if they're doing the test on site, then they're in front of you. But otherwise, you wouldn't see this typically done at startups just like that, unless it's just the very initial screening, because they get much deeper with their tech test. But when it does happen on site, and then when it does happen online and it's automated, you must get familiar with the platform before you actually get into the nitty gritty of it. So even at Hackatrail, shameless pitch, shameless plug, we cover about 100 different skills, and you can go and prep yourself on that. And as you go through it, you've always got a practice module, right? So you can go through that, make sure you're comfortable with how the Hackatrail platform looks, and then you can build your credibility from there in how you crack those challenges and win your badges. But the test can be quite intense as well. So you got to watch out for that, and you should know beforehand from your interviewer on what the test is about. If you don't know that, ask. Don't just go start accessing the link and start cracking something. Ask what that's about first. Now, when it actually comes to the tech test being given in the form of a take-home assignment, this becomes a little bit more interesting. Not complicated, just interesting. Because lots of coders that we speak to, or lots of folks that we speak to in tech in general, they believe that a take-home test is super hard and everything that it has is very, very elaborate and very deep. That is a misconception. It is precise for sure, which means they expect you to check off a certain number of boxes. But they most certainly know that not everyone takes the test with the same level of vigor. Things happen, you're a busy person as well. So they look for those 10 or 20 things, which are almost at a fundamental level on how you bring your, whether it's code or your case study or your thinking or your problem solving ability to the table, right? So don't think of it as something which is mega and completely let it derail you and overthink it, where you have to ask 10 different friends on how to approach it, do all kinds of research. If you are talented enough and if you think that that test is the right speed for you, just take it and you'll be fine, right? Just make sure your fundamentals are right. But I'd love for the panelists to chime in, because I may talk about it, but they see this every single day, a dozen times a day. So Iriani, what do you think?
The technical test that we ask is a take-home test. It's not a link. In fact, the test in itself is not complicated. For us, it's very simple. We just look for code quality, production readiness, which is something you would expect if you to do the job daily in the first place. And exactly like you said, some people overthink it and really over-engineer their solution. But some people also does not read the instructions carefully and do not provide production-ready code, nor with high code quality. So it sounds simple enough, but unfortunately, that in itself already tripped at least 50% of the candidates that reach this stage.
That is a very valid point. We see this time and time again, that people come back and don't actually read the instructions, even though the company goes through hoops to make sure that the instructions are as clear as possible for you to take the test. Rekha, what do you think?
For us, we don't really have take-home assessments. I think only our front-end engineers do it, and I think probably very similar to what Zulka has. It's not very complicated. We just want to see who you are as an engineer, how you actually code your solution. Perhaps I can tap onto when I was a tech recruiter with my agency before, and when we used to have some of our clients that had take-home assessments, we used to tell our candidates, and I used to tell them all the time, like, you have a weekend to do it. Exactly like what was mentioned before, don't over-engineer it, keep it simple. But also please don't go on Stack Overflow and copy and send in somebody else's solution. Even though I've told candidates that, and I've told them that it's been, you can advise them only so much. We have seen solutions that have come in copied. And you're just doing yourself a disservice. If you need an extension, reach out to us and say, this has happened, this is what's going on in my life, I need a couple more days. I think we're generally quite nice people. We will usually give you that extension, and we understand that things happen in life. The worst thing you could do is either ghost us and don't submit it, or copy, just pull some solution offline and put it in as yours. And then if you fail, like, you fail on somebody's solution and not your own. You're just doing yourself a complete disservice.
That's a great point for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, just to round up, I agree. It's all about what your code quality and sort of the production value of what you're doing. And I think, across all our tech roles, the take home that we give them, it's also to see what their thought process is. So even, with some, of the more junior level, we do have a software engineering take-home test, and we are able to see on the platform sort of a replay of what their code is. So sometimes even if they don't get sort of all the answers just right, there are some that, we'll take a further look at, and I work with, our engineers to review some of those, and they say, oh, this person, knows what they're doing, because they see organically how you're typing in your different lines of code, even though the system may, based on some syntax, not award you certain value points. That being said, we've also had candidates where suddenly, it just like a huge like line of code just pops in, and you're just like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
So we're able to sort of view this as well. But again, it's about the thought process and how you're approaching the problem.
Awesome, thanks. And I think we'll just take one question here, which is, what should I do? What should we do if the hiring manager / peer shoot down your solution in an offensive manner? So I'll speak to this because what we see is once in a while when we deal with clients, we'll see that the hiring manager may not necessarily be the right person to interview, but they've been pulled in. This happens more so with early stage startups. And then as a result, they're short of time. And what they may do is just be, I wouldn't call it offensive, but very direct and very candid, right, with their feedback. And not show any mercy at all, right? So that happens, and there's two things to it. One is you got to suck it up, right? Because at the end of the day, you've applied for a certain role and it didn't work out. But then the second part is that if you're working through a channel like a channel partner, like whether it's a recruitment agency that pushed your resume through, give them that feedback so that feedback can go to the hiring manager. If you've interacted only with the HR or the TA person, it's okay for you to politely give them that feedback to say, listen, I'm okay to take negative news, but I'd love to have that professional courtesy extended. I think it's all fair because even particularly the folks on the call here, as much as they would love to recruit top tech talent into the company, they're also guardians of the brand, right? And so they make sure that it's not just them, but the entire interview process and the experience that you have is pristine, right? That's part of their remit. So you must feel compelled to actually go back and give them that feedback and don't just let it be. It would be my 2 cents. Yeah.
Yep. No, I agree with that. I think, as internal TAs, we love that sort of feedback because we always are trying to refine the process. And, that also involves, the attitudes that our interviewers have, when they're going through these interviews. So it's definitely helpful for us to, while maybe one instance may be a bit of an outlier, but, if a particular interviewer gets similar feedback from different candidates, then we're able to sort of address that, with your help, giving us proper feedback.
Awesome.
Yeah, sorry, just to jump in, I think a certain misconception is that as much as we are TAs and yes, we work for the company, the candidate experience that you walk away with is also very important to us. The interview process goes both ways. As much as we're interviewing, you as a candidate, you're interviewing us as a potential place to work, and you're interviewing us as potential colleagues. So we are very aware of these experiences, and we always welcome feedback like that because it's a reflection of the brand, and it's a reflection of who are the people that you're going to be working with. And if it's a detriment to that particular experience and getting great people into the team, that's definitely something that we will want to be raised.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Okay, let's move on to the next one, which is the HOD round. So I'll breeze through this very quickly. So once in a while, again, if your role is senior enough, you may be put in front of the heads of departments or a very senior person who are gauging you not so much on your technical ability because you've done the hard part so far. So congratulations, you've made it through 3 steps. Those were the toughest steps possibly. And typically you see when you go through those steps, I'd say, and you guys can chime in, but for every 10 people who make it through the first 3 rounds, the HOD would probably shoot down only 1 or 2, maybe 3 people. But otherwise, more often than not, 70, 80, 90% of the people will move on to the HR round and get an offer. So the HOD person is actually gauging for culture, right? What things motivate you, what doesn't motivate you. If they can see something that particularly spikes your attention, which they know doesn't align well with their team, or maybe someone didn't figure out what your growth trajectory was, and maybe you wanted to do something really grand and you've not been able to do that. If they sense that level, that there is a disconnect in the role and what you are at, or where your head's at, then they will shoot you down. So it is important to actually research who the HOD is. One thing I should have mentioned is throughout your process, obviously make sure that you're asking your TA person or your HR manager that you've interacted with, who the people are, what their backgrounds are, what the LinkedIn profiles like, so you can do your research, get to know them, right? And everyone's very transparent about that most days. If they're not, that also says something about the company. And you may want to watch for that a little bit. But when you've got that information, read about them, see their articles, see what they think like, what they contribute to the public web like, and then you'll know on how to conduct yourself as part of the interview. That's what I would say. Anyone else have anything? Iriani, when Jonas is brought into the picture for certain senior rounds, what do you think he looks for? And Jonas is the CEO of Zulke Singapore.
Yes, for our top level roles, of course, our CEO will be part of the interview process. What he looks for, he also has a very, very good poker face. There were many times where after the interview, candidate says, "Oh, that was so awesome, I think I can get the job." And then I hear the opposite from the CEO. So he's a very, very good interviewer as well. I would say he is really looking for a little bit of everything. As long as, first of all, no red flags. That's most importantly. Or whatever it is, there's no red flags. And secondly, it's to look like, to sound like you have definitely gone through the interviews, which means your questions cannot be as simple as it was in the first interview. Your question must have progressed. Your understanding of the role must have progressed. You cannot be, treating that interview as if it's the first time and that you are meeting somebody from Zulke. He's expecting somebody who has gone through everything and all of the process, and then to ask questions where it is definitely only he can answer. So for example, if you want to ask, more about what is the company plans, what's the growth plans, things that would reflect your enthusiasm for the role in the long term. Because if we're hiring somebody senior, we are not hiring that person for just 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. People in our company, just like our CEO has been in the company for 15 years, and he started out as a junior engineer and progressively got promoted to be at the level that he is now. So really the sky is the limit in Zulke. So because of that, when you reach this round, definitely do your research, exactly like Tushar said.
Awesome, fantastic. And there's a question that's come up, which is very interesting, and this happens all the time, right? If I don't see great reviews about a company online, is it okay to be candid about it during the later stages of the interview, or would that count as not culture fit? So I'd love to say here that this is the advantage of going to the CEO or the senior level down. This is the advantage. You can bring these things up because they're equipped to answer that, right? And they're there because they belong there in those roles. And if they are not able to tackle that on head on, then I'd be very, very surprised. So I'd say, yeah, any question that you think is bugging in your head that, yeah, I've loved the experience so far, but these two things, can you clarify for me? I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times, maybe 10 out of 10, they would appreciate those thoughts because you're showing that you want to be part of the company. You've got certain, hesitations or apprehensions, and you want those sorted before you actually come on board. So those are all great things. Yeah. Okay. Okay, fantastic. Now let's move on to the last round, which is the offer round. So again, you've gone through 4 good rounds. You finally result in an offer. That means you've done everything right to get to the offer stage, which is fantastic. Now is when the trickiness starts again, right? So you've proved yourself technically competent and a cultural fit. Everyone loves you. They want you on board. But when it comes to the offer, there are lots of things that go into it. And this is where it really tells very clearly when the person is realistic about what offer they're expecting versus they're just shooting for the sky because they believe that they've done a good job in the interviews, now they suddenly deserve more money, right? So the offer's about compensation, and you should isolate from your head that that's not just money. When the offer is being rolled out, you have to evaluate it as what the role you're going to be part of, what team you're going to be working with. Obviously, the salary that you get, the perks, the benefits that you get, your longer term growth in the company, the types of projects you're going to be working on, right? There are 5 or 6 different ingredients, and that's what really constitutes on how you should evaluate an offer. And from the panelists here, would you like to talk about some things that you consider while rolling out an offer. How do you size up a candidate's salary information, compensation? What do you think about there? I know we're dovetailing into offer negotiation, but that's fine. We'll get into that. Yeah.
I guess I could start. We try and tackle it from two parts. There's both internal and external equity, and we want to make sure an offer is mutually beneficial to both us as well as to the candidate. Having said that, we do have internal competency levels in place. So different seniority levels, across different departments, they do have a range that we're to work with. This is also finalized with our budgeting. That's why I guess the timelines for the offer stage could be quite quick if it's within that range. Anything above that, we would also have to take special sort of, approvals for that. But we want to make sure that both essentially the candidates, move makes sense for him. Like we would try not to reduce their salary, but also seeing, in terms of their if you're coming from like a large multinational bank into something that's a little bit more startup, we also want to see what your motivations behind that move would be, versus, I guess, looking for a pay increment. So there are a lot of different factors that we would sort of assess, not just from a numerical standpoint, but also what your motivations are and what you're looking forward to. And that's also, we try and tie that back into our initial conversations in the phone screen, what those expectations are. So this is where we really solidify that and seeing how we could reach an agreement for that.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Anyone else?
I would say for us, we speak about the offer at all stages of the interview, except for the actual numbers. That means we talk about everything else. We're happy to answer questions on benefits. We're happy to answer questions on monetary or non-monetary benefits. We're happy to answer questions on culture and any other incentives that we have. Everything but the actual base salary that you will be offered, which will be at the last stage. So we want to make sure that all these components will discuss throughout the entire process. So in a way, it's two-way as well. We also want to make sure that we fit to what you're looking for. I've had in the past had candidates where the reason why they want to move on from the company that they were from is because they were really doing too much OT, too much overtime for them, and their life goal has changed, their habits has changed, and they are looking predominantly for work-life balance, and that's what they sense throughout the entire interview process. And to them, that work-life balance is most important, and therefore that to them is an intangible, where it in itself has a cost to them. So they in those cases, some candidates are even willing to have the exact same salary to move on. So I would say that always speak about what you're looking for and what's important to you, throughout the process as well. Don't wait, until the end to ask all questions. Although you can, but you may not cover everything, and you may not even remember everything that you want to ask if you wait till the end.
Thanks, Iryani. Rika, anything to add from your end?
No, I think it's been covered by the panel as well. I think, like what Jason mentioned, it definitely goes back to your motivations, and being very clear about what you're expecting from your next role. If anything in your personal situation changes, where, your motivations need to be altered slightly because of something that happened, in your personal life, I think be honest about it and keep all of us informed. It's a constant feedback loop. It's constant communication, and like Iryani mentioned, it's not fair to yourself, and it's not fair to the company as well, just to bring it up at the end. It's always a feedback loop, and the more you share about it, and the more you reaffirm those motivations, I think it always helps the process along.
Awesome, great, thanks for that. I guess just a couple of quick questions on this one. One is, I've received a company from offer A. I've received an offer from company A, and I'm also in the final stages with company B. And how do I tell company A that I need some more time without expressly saying that I want to go and interview with company B? So I think that's one we probably have to deal with lots of times. I think us as an agency, we deal with this a lot more, because we hear this from candidates when they're at final stages. They're like, hey, listen, I just received an offer. They're like, what? It took you 3 weeks to get to this offer, and now you want to go and not do this. So this one gets tricky, and I think jokes apart, it all boils down to your personal motivation, right? So you shouldn't be kidding yourself. It's very clear that when you start interviewing, you should start interviewing for the right reasons. So what's not working for you, and why did you start this interview process? Obviously, if you've lost your job, it's completely different, and that's where you're comparing, apples and oranges and trying to see what fits better. But have your motivation straight. That means if you've received an offer and that offer wasn't in line with your financial expectations, right? You thought you would get, I don't know, maybe 5, 10, 20% more. I'm not sure what the number is. It's okay to actually communicate that back to the team. And if they really like you and if something's workable, they will try and work that out. If it isn't workable, I'm pretty sure that they will be upfront about it because there's just that much negotiation that people have. On the other hand, if you had some apprehensions, we've had that as well, where a very senior person actually wanted to take on I think it was a lead data scientist role at a massive company. And he did not want to take that on till he met with the HOD one more time because he was like, I'm not sure what I'm getting myself into, right? And so he did that. He said, I've received the offer, but before I accept it, I want to do that. And he didn't have any other offer pending, but it's okay to actually go and try and buy some time. But if you're very upfront and candid and say, listen, salary is not adding up and I think I can get a better offer, you're probably not going to get the first one either. You're going to lose that. Yeah. Anything else from anyone on this? No? Move on. Okay, at what stage are reference checks done? The reference checks done are typically at the end. So obviously once the offer is accepted, then the reference checks will start. Obviously, if you come through a referral, then the reference checks could happen a little bit sooner, but more often than not, they'll happen towards the end. Typically, it's not more than 2 people that they would go through. In some cases, companies will be elaborate and do 3 or 4. They'll also do a reference check on your education, or a background check rather on your education. I remember this one time when I was at Goldman Sachs again. I was building my entire team and I was the lead for that team. And as I went through that, one of the people who I was really counting on who would have joined me, we went through again the same 7 rounds of interviews. He got the offer, but then when he went through a reference check or a background check, what happened was that he had claimed that he had a master's degree, but he was 2 credits short, 2 credits, and he was going to do his walk at, I think, in 2 months after he joined Goldman. But they saw it as not an amber, as a red flag, and they actually took the offer away from him. And that came as quite a bit of a surprise to me. But then if you think of it at a different level, it's just about your ethics and what they're bringing in, right? So if they have a shadow of doubt on who you are as a person, what your personal integrity is like, you're going to lose that job, regardless of how well you've done as part of the interview process. So keep that in mind. Your reference check should be with people who are willing to take the time to share. There is this common thing around, should I just have reference checks with the people who will always side with me? Yes, of course you can do that. But the people who are taking the reference checks are smart enough to wiggle this information out from the person who's offering it up. So rest assured, if there is some dirt, they will dig it up, right? They're quite used to this. So I think that was the offer. On the salary negotiation piece, are there any other tips or tricks that you guys would want to offer up or state, the panelists, as part of this? Okay, cool.
Sorry, Tuja, are you referring to the offer itself and how we put it together? Or are you referring to the negotiation piece and how we do that?
It's the negotiation piece. So let's say if someone did come back to you and try and negotiate, any tips on what you would be open to negotiating on and what you would see as red flags that they shouldn't be negotiating on?
I think for us, like, these conversations happen almost on a daily basis. It does come back to why, we want to understand why, right? We always want to understand what is it that you're looking for. Is there a reason? Do you have another offer, a competing offer that perhaps you haven't shared with us or you haven't disclosed, and you want to see if we can match that? We want to understand where it's coming from, right? Do you feel like it's not in line with the market standards? Then we will then, and this is, I can speak for myself, like I want to understand, okay, where are you getting your data from? Because putting an offer together, it's not just something that we do at a snap of a finger. If we're going to go back to renegotiate for more money, like, we need those data points as well, and we need to go back to the business to kind of justify, pretty much justify like why this particular candidate deserves this increment or deserves a remuneration or a revised offer. And at the end of the day, like, we're almost impartial to both sides. Like, of course, if you're, we want to get you on board, we want to fill that role, right? But the only way we can do that is if we partner up together. We're not against you. So it's really about having an open and honest conversation about, was it something in your personal life that's changed? That's why you need a little bit more pocket change in your bank account every month. Is it because you have a competing offer? Is it because you're trying to buy more time? Like that scenario that was raised where you're trying to buy a couple more days because you have a final round that you want to go for. It's really being honest about it and keeping that channel of communication open. We just want to understand why, and we just want to understand the why more than the actual amount itself. Sorry.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you for that. Okay, guys, we're going to take the last two questions and then we'll end off over there. So I think this one has some value. Is it obligatory for me to disclose my previous and current salary? This seems disadvantageous to me, as the company might use this to figure out a reason to limit my compensation package. So again, I can take that first, right? So this happens a lot, right? This happens a lot where you believe that you should, you got the short end of the stick at your previous company, and for whatever reasons in the past couple of years, your salary hasn't been revised that much, and that's the reason why you're looking. And now you're looking, and so people are sizing you up based on your current salary, and they want to offer you a 6 or an 8 or a 10% increment, but you're looking for a 30% increment in your head because you feel, you've earned it and you've been on the same salary since the past couple of years. I'll be a little bit candid over here. So there are almost two different ideologies, East and West. When you look at companies in the West, they will level you no matter what, right? More often than not, you see that they don't actually hold you based on your current salary, at least the most forward-thinking companies, right? They will actually level you based on what you bring to the table. So I'll give an example. One of our clients is General Assembly, and General Assembly was hiring for a certain senior software engineer in KL, Kuala Lumpur. And so this was their first hire for KL. And I remember that as we went through this entire notion, General Assembly was so fed up with the lack of technical talent. Thankfully, they hired one through us. And as they did that, they doubled the person's salary, right? The person gave in their current salary and they just doubled it and they put that as part of the offer. Now, obviously, that's not something you expect every day and it doesn't happen that often. But the reason why they did that is because the person was clearly operating at that high level and they already knew that. And they were like, listen, no sense in shortchanging a person because tomorrow they're going to get up and leave and get absorbed somewhere else. So they adjusted it, right? But in companies in Asia, you'll see lesser of that. You'll see people do benchmark you against your current base salary and your upside is on your current base salary. Is it fair? Quite honestly, no, it's not always fair, but that's something that is the lay of the land. That's where you try and pick companies who can think outside the box, who can push for that extra approval for you if you think you're worth it. But yeah, sometimes you do get the short end of the stick there.
I can add to that, Tushar. I think I totally agree with your point, and you're definitely not obligated to provide a current salary. I think when candidates sort of respond in that way, I'll usually ask, what's your expectation? Because I think as long as you know your worth, what your value is in the market, there will be companies that will offer that to you. And I think as a company's perspective, looking at it more long term, we of course do want to provide something that would keep you there long term. So if we shortchange you now, you're going to leave us in 2-3 months, once you find a better offer. So I think it's also in our interest to make sure that you're being paid, for, at a valued market rate, for your role as well.
Absolutely.
The point I would add to that, also, of course, the higher the salary that you're looking for, the more difficult the technical interview or the rest of the interview process would be. Because if you're shooting for a more senior role or if you're shooting for a lead role, then you will be tested as a lead. You will be tested as a senior engineer. So, and of course, whatever is your current salary, if that is your expectation and you pass at that, then I would say very well deserved.
Agree. Thank you very much. And this is the last question that we look at. In early stage of one's career, should we look at brand value in an employer can give me, or the role and compensation? It could differ for people, but what do you suggest? So I'd definitely say, I mean, I've done this for 20 years and a 20-year career later, I'd definitely say, go for not just brand value, go for role value, right? So what is that package that you're getting? It's not about the compensation, leave the compensation out. What is the actual role you're going to be doing at the company? That's very important. The people you're going to be associating with, that's very important. And obviously the brand is very important as well. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say more than likely if I was in early stages, I'd get persuaded to take on a really great brand, even though the role that I'm doing there may not be as competent as the role that I'm doing at a much smaller company, but it's a much wider role, right? So I can see that if you're an early career person, then you may get lured towards that. So you be your own judge. Yes, there are some stereotypes who will gauge you based on your brands, and those stereotypes exist everywhere. So you have to watch for that. If you do get an offer for a really grand company versus not, and if you're in the very early stages of your career, then you may be pulled towards that brand regardless of what that role brings to the table. And there's nothing wrong with that. Lots of people make that choice. Anyone that, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I guess, also to touch on brand, really not just, how it looks externally, but there has to be something said about, famous tech brands like the Google, like even, Gojek, Grab in Southeast Asia, where, if there is a good culture of, collaboration, training, and mentorship there, and that's the brand value, and that's a very good way to propel your careers, really, from learning from people that are very well versed in their field, depending on which industry and which companies you're focusing on. So I think that's another aspect you can look at when picking a company to work for in your early stage.
Definitely a great point. Yeah. Okay, awesome. I think we've answered some questions. There are 3 or 4 more which I will answer after this. But panelists, any final thoughts before we conclude the session? I know you're 15 minutes over, but anything that you guys would like to add, or if you're all done, that's fine too.
In summary, I just want to say that we do want to hire you. We want you to pass at every round. As recruiters, we want you to pass each round. In fact, sometimes, we be the devil's advocate internally as well. We ask the engineers or the HODs, why do you feel it this way? Why is this an immediate fail? Why, what were the red flags? So in fact, for some really difficult roles, we push back very often. Because we're very motivated to want to get you on board and to get the right person on board. But it's always a kind of balance, right? To be able to convince internal stakeholders what's out there in the market, but also trying to find the best person for the job at that time. You also have to be aware of, the market competitiveness at that time. If you are one person competing against 10,000 people who are graduating at the same time as you, or you happen to be one person who is looking for a job at the Chinese New Year stage where nobody wants to resign anyway. So sometimes a little bit of luck, a little bit of market situation would affect if you can get the job or not. And then as recruiters, we would adjust, of course, ourselves and the way we receive accordingly. So definitely keep positive and know that we definitely want to have you on board if, let's say, you pass every round, and why not?
That's great advice, Iryani. I think we all need some of that. I think with all of the bad news going around, people sometimes lose confidence at a very different level, right? And so if you're looking for a job, and I know it's tough out there because there are lots of people looking for jobs right now, but hang in there. If you've got skills, you will get recognized, you will get identified, and you will get hired. But again, keep your smarts on, try and stand out from the crowd, focus on the basics, don't overcomplicate it, right? Your career is literally in your hands, and that's just not a mom and pop statement. That's how it works. It is in your hand also. Stay strong, stay focused, and thanks so much to the panelists for actually sharing all of the insights. I think it was awesome, loved it, and I'll certainly send out the recording later on. Guys, when you do finish up, make sure you look for the quick survey that appears on your screen, on your Zoom screen. Make sure you take a quick minute and do that survey. That will help us get better. And again, be as candid as you'd like, but definitely take that out. If you need some career advice, if you want some coaching, you want to deep dive into your resume, etc., reach out to community@hackertrail.com. No strings attached. We'd be happy to do that and give you that free advice, whether it's 30 minutes or an hour, so that you feel better about your next set of interviews. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a fantastic evening again, and see ya. Bye.
Thanks, guys. All the best.